Welcome back, everybody. We're here for more Brian G. Murphy shenanigans as we talk more about this chapter of, I almost called it Exodus, which I'm way behind the times, Deuteronomy.
And it's
chapters,
actually 3 chapters.
No, 3 chapters of Deuteronomy that we read. There's a lot here. There's a lot. The minds were blown. People were killed.
Hearts were
Well, no,
changed.
they might have been killed.
Hearts were changed.
There was a possibility of death, but not actual people died.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, I want to jump in with a question of, so Brian, you run a course on reading the Bible, and you also have a podcast specifically about reading the Bible from a queer perspective. Does Deuteronomy offer us anything regarding that? Are there
Should
any
we be
gems?
wasting our
That's a
time?
great question.
Yeah, there's so one of my the verses that I have in my head that I can rattle off is from Deuteronomy 30. So this is a spoiler alert. So I actually got excited when we started reading because I thought it was going to be in this passage, but it's not. This idea of blessings and curses, as you've noticed, is like an ongoing thing. And in Deuteronomy 30, it says, like, I set before you like life and death, blessings and curses, like now choose life. And I think it's like gets misappropriated to be this like anti-abortion thing, but that my take on that is like similar to how we were talking on Multamory about like we are already like enough and we're good and we like don't need this like academic debate to prove our worthiness, that like it's just simple. Like there's like things that lead to life and things that lead to death, and so like if something's like not serving you and like not giving you life, like don't choose that and like choose the things that lead to life. And so that's like this cool little gem later on in Deuteronomy that's coming up for you.
That's
Okay,
awesome.
Nice, something to look forward to.
It's funny. So Emily, we were talking about this reading the Bible course that I'm doing, and actually I intentionally kind of looked at our schedule coming up, and I picked something that by the time I'm finished with the course, we will then get to it, so that I can like have some stuff to bring. And it's actually Deuteronomy 32. So it's very close to what Brian was talking about just now. It's actually a little song. Spoiler alert. It's a little song that Moses is going to sing.
Is God gonna...
No,
I was going to
Moses.
say, is God going to sing?
No, come on.
It's like a
is gonna
Moses
sing a song.
death song.
Kind of,
Moses
yeah.
is going to sing a song and then he's going to die.
It is actually a
Jeez.
little bit like that, yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
But anyway,
That's a little sad.
When Brian, when you were
mean,
talking
maybe
about that,
that's
I
kinda
got excited. I was like, oh, maybe that's the verse I picked. And it's not quite. I'm off by a couple chapters.
That's all right. Well done. Wow. Well, are you... So, okay, yes, not necessarily like anything that in these particular chapters besides what you just said, but do you feel like God during the Old Testament is... I know that he's different than the God in the New Testament. I mean, I guess he's the same God, but he's kind of like...
What a question.
At least
I love
Christians...
it.
I love
Christians
this
that
question on so many levels.
Christians that I've heard have been saying like they're kind of different gods. So is he? How do you like reconcile the fact that he's kind of like angry all the time and like killing people left and right?
Yeah, so there's this like anti-Semitic idea that like the God of the Hebrew Bible is this like angry, wrathful God, and the God of the Christian Bible is like justice and love and mercy. And like,
I have heard people saying things like that.
yeah, it's this sort of like Christian supremacist idea that like they got it wrong and we've got it right. But like the Christian Bible says like some messed up stuff also.
Well, yeah, and I
like,
said that I was like, the Christian Bible has hell, and the Old Testament God doesn't,
doesn't have that.
make anyone burn for eternity. So
right, and that like, you know, there's like in Isaiah, like the prophet Isaiah is saying that God is saying like, you know, I'm here to set the oppressed free and heal the sick and like redistribute wealth. And like in Amos, they talk about if you have like these religious festivals and your burnt offerings, but if you're like not doing justice, then like it's all a waste, and like what actually matters is like justice and mercy. And so like that's, I think, this idea of, there's certainly like you can point to here and there, both in the Hebrew Bible and in the Christian Bible, like, let me pluck this verse and like look how like weird and angry God is. But also there's also this through line of like pursuit of justice and God being with the marginalized and God being with the oppressed. And so then what do you like, how do you, one of the things we talk about in this course and on the podcast is like looking at the context and trying to like figure out what it was, when it was written, and trying to imagine like what we might have felt like then, or how that might apply to our lives now, to see like, oh, like, well, I can kind of understand why like you might say this or think that or do this. And not to say that like advocating for like genocide or murder, like killing people is like a good thing, but you like start to begin to understand the context and like marginalized people sort of like fighting for their lives and like lashing out at their oppressors is different than really powerful American Christians using the Bible to say like, I'm going to take over the world and it's like my divine right?
Yeah.
So I think like when we all have this sort of, we come to it with what we've heard, and that's maybe not how the Bible has been historically seen and used by folks.
Yeah, I mean, taking it in the context of today versus what it was written as.
Yeah,
those are two very different.
But also,
things.
God does change, right? Like in Genesis, God like doesn't know.
He's like a politician.
Yeah, God's like a person, like doesn't know where like the man and the woman are in the garden, and like walks around, and later becomes like sort of more omniscient and more like
a pillar of fire,
a pillar of fire, and out there,
and so a bush.
Yeah. So this idea that like God has always been omnipresent and omniscient is just like not reflected in the text, because people's understandings of like who they are and how they relate to each other and like what sort of the meaning of life is changes over time. So that's like to be expected.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember that when we were reading the story of the Binding of Isaac, one of the things that came up when we tried to look into some of like the history of that was that potentially the story was originally written where he does sacrifice his son Isaac. And then as culture changed to not look so positively on child sacrifice, or in this case, he was probably more of an adolescent or maybe even in his early 20s, but, of sacrifice of humans, that as that changed, then those verses were edited, were changed to then be, oh, actually he spares him. Or maybe originally Yahweh had told him to sacrifice his son and he just didn't. And then later, during a time when monarchy was more important, it was edited to say, oh, actually, but then God told him not to. So it was okay. And he wasn't being rebellious. He was actually obeying. Like that there's kind of depends on the context.
Yeah, there's this author, theologian, Rob Bell, who has this book called What is the Bible, if I'm remembering correctly. And it's like he gets into like a few different perspectives, but this particular passage he looks at, and it's like he manages to be like super like nerdy and historical, but also like super, super accessible. So if folks actually want to learn more. What is the Bible by Rob Bell. And it talks, and I wish I could remember the details, but there's a lot in the Bible, so I don't remember. But how like... that you can, there's a way to look at that in like in its time and place and in the context of the Bible and be like, this is actually the sort of like inspiring and exciting story rather than just from our perspective, like this is terrible and gruesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, but it's hard to avoid the gruesome response, I find. Like, even...
At least upon first reading.
Yeah, but even looking back on it as, looking at the Israelites as an oppressed people, it is still hard to read these passages that are like, yeah, and we slaughtered this other tribe, and we even killed their women and their children. And, I think when we're reading it, we try to take a step back, essentially, as it were, and just think about the fact that, yeah, times were different, and this is kind of what you did back then, is you kind of hopped around performing genocide in order to be able to get the land that you needed. But it is, I think, even from looking at the Israelites as an oppressed people, it is still hard to be like, well, good for them for totally wiping out this other people.
Right.
Totally. I think you get to be like a yes and, right? That like perhaps some of the things in the Bible were perhaps at their time like very like progressive, and it was like moving society like leaps and bounds forward. And also today we're like, well, that shit is like still like, you know, oppressive and regressive, and we're sort of like looking at it from our perspective backwards. And I don't know what, but I'm sure there's stuff about like definitely our society in America, and like even like probably my personal political ideas that hopefully 1,000 years from now people will look back and be like, oh my God, can you believe that, you know, what that person did? Even though I like to think of myself as sort of like a radical on the front. We're all sort of, which is not to like excuse it. I think you just have to like, yeah, it's like it's messed up, and also we're not living however many thousands of years ago, and so I think the Bible and like trying to figure out exactly what's happening there gets like an undue place in society, and sometimes it's like, well, what now? What do we do now? And like it's there. Maybe there's something to learn from there, but I think this compulsion to be like, it has to always be exactly how it was in the Bible is really not helpful. And if we can't acknowledge the ways in which it's problematic, then then it's no good.
Well, yeah, it is that difficult thing. Like you say, that it becomes the cyclical thing of, you know, well, we can't apply our modern day morals and values to what was happening back then. But then again, at the same time, we're looking at what was happening back then, or the account of what was happening back then to inform our modern day morals and values. And it becomes almost this weird feedback loop, you know?
Yeah. And I don't want to like when I look back and people be like, oh, well, you have to like, you know, for me, like as a gay person, like, oh, well, like back then it was like a different time. And so like, of course they were homophobic. And I was like, well, homophobia was like wrong back then also. Yeah. So like rape and murder was like still wrong back then. And it's not, I don't think, problematic to like name that. And also sometimes like morality gets gray in terms of like who's a terrorist and who's a freedom fighter. And like, what does it all look like? Both like now and then.
Brian, who is a terrorist and who is a freedom fighter?
Oh, boy.
Put me on an FBI watch list.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, yeah, we don't want to do that for sure.
Yeah.
It's funny, actually. I worked on a TV show doing visual effects where we had to look up a lot of stuff for reference, looking up stuff about like spy drones and the NSA and stuff like that. And basically all of us at work were like, yeah, we're definitely on watch lists now based on our Google searches.
Wow. Eek.
Okay, so just like a thing I was thinking about the other day, just randomly, was I was thinking about the musical Book of Mormon and was singing the songs by myself here in this apartment in Japan and having a grand old time, and was kind of laughing about some of the silly things that are brought up in the musical The Book of Mormon, which is, you know, stuff like there's the line in the song I Believe where he says, you know, like, and I believe that, you know, God lives on a planet called Kobol, and like I believe that I'll get my own planet as well, and that in 1978 God changed his mind about black people, and like all of these things that we all look at and laugh about, and then realizing that a lot of the audience would go and laugh at how ridiculous that is, and then go home and tell their children some of the things that we were brought up as Christians, but these things are okay, that there's this God who really wanted to punish us, but because he loved us, he killed his son instead because he didn't want to have to kill us and he had to kill someone. So, you know, just this like weird stuff that feels normal. And I feel like even saying it right now, it feels absurd for me to make that comparison because that was taught to me as so normal. And just like,
it's
how weird is that?
I would go. I think it's weird, and I think I would go a step further. Even like Mormonism, quote unquote, is like weird, and like so is Christianity. But like I think secular folks also like sometimes have these like weird ideas about like the way things are. I think I'm like, obviously I do like this work as like a Christian theologian, but I'm also kind of an atheist at the same time.
Whoa, stop the presses.
Mind blown again.
Like they're like, I don't know, there's like not someone up in the sky, but like something is like humans come together.
So you're spiritual. You're more along the lines of Dedeker's mother than
I think that I'm actually I think I'm actually religious but not spiritual.
Whoa. Mind double blown, but like triple blown.
But
Okay.
but like so like I have friends that like aren't necessarily Christians, but they like believe in ghosts or like believe in astrology or like the Enneagram. And like that's also like not scientifically, proven, right? And the way that we talk about humans just like are constantly talking in metaphors, sometimes so much so that we don't even realize it. Like when people die, like us carrying them with us, like they're just like really gone and like decomposing. But so like it's like who's like what's weird and what's normal and what's like metaphor, and in what ways were the people writing this stuff even ever trying to be like this like literally historically happened versus like we're spinning these stories to try and make meaning, and like humans' brains work better with stories, and so like if we can craft this story, we can like get our point across in a way that's like different than if we just like explained it. So that's I don't know, it's all weird.
Yeah.
All right.
But also about Jesus dying, we have a webinar on all about that, and that's not God didn't want people to kill people.
Cool.
Well, that's cool. I'll have to check that one out. I haven't seen that yet. I just got my newest lecture for the Reading the Bible course, so I'm going to do that first, but then we'll do that. Thank you so much for joining us.
You got a while before you get there.
Today. I know. We've got like a few years before we're going to get there on this show.
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah. All right, Brian, thank you again so much for joining us today. We're really excited about this. It was good to get to talk to you and have our minds blown several times about all of this. Thank you so much. And to our listeners at home, go check out Brian and his work at queertheology.com. They've also got a podcast that comes out every week. You've got more than 300 episodes now?
Almost 300.
Wow.
Episodes.
Almost 300.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Congratulations to you on that. It is no small feat, we can tell you.
No.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. And to everyone out there, we will see you next week to read more of Deuteronomy.